Hello, this is Charles Parselle. Welcome to another edition of The Legal File. I'm very intrigued and fortunate today to have the opportunity to welcome as a guest on the show the man who hopes to be the next city attorney for the great city of Los Angeles, which is the second largest city in the United States. Please welcome with me David Berger. David, how nice to see you today.
And Charles, thank you so much for inviting me here.
It's certainly a pleasure. Now, you're already a deputy district attorney, aren't you?
That's right. I've been doing that for about 12 years now.
Yes. So you've been involved in fighting crime in the district attorney, meaning the county of Los Angeles, correct?
That's right. Just so you know, the district attorney has jurisdiction over the entire county, whereas the city attorney, his jurisdiction is the city of Los Angeles. Other small cities within the county will also have their own city attorneys, but I'm after the biggest apple, which is the city of Los Angeles.
Which is about 3.5 million people, or
actually
thereabouts.
4 now, yes.
4 million people. You want to be the person in charge of essentially keeping crime off the streets.
Yes, as city attorney, one is the chief law enforcement officer for the city, and it's my responsibility to see that the deputy city attorneys that work in that office have the tools that they need to do the job they do, and also to work with law enforcement to make sure they are able to bring us cases that we can prosecute.
Why do you want this job?
It's a long story. Originally, when I came to America, I decided I was going to practice immigration law and family law. And so I set about getting myself a job with a firm. And the first case we had, I was sort of second chair. I wasn't doing very much. And it should have been a slam dunk. We should have won it. We represented mother. She was after custody for the child. And the father was a lunatic. That's the only way to describe it. I won't go into the details. But we ended up losing. And we ended up losing because the father, the lunatic father, had a lawyer who wasn't a family law practitioner, wasn't an expert. And he wiped the floor with us. When our main witness got on the stand, he was able to cross-examine her and basically tear her apart. Well, after that case was over, I approached this gentleman and I said to him, you know, I was so impressed with what you did. How did you learn all that? And he said, well, I was a deputy DA for 20 years, and that set me up. And I think if you're a DA, you can do just about anything. So I made my business at that point in time to join the DA's office, and I started working for them as a volunteer, just volunteering my time, and eventually they hired me. And I thought I'll stick it out for a couple of years and then go off and do immigration law and family law. But you know what? I fell in love with the job. There is such a sense of just doing the right thing makes you feel so comfortable. You can go to sleep at night not worrying about what you've done. Because at the end of the day, if I do my job properly, society, the city, the county is safer. I've put bad people away. I've protected society.
And that in essence is the job, prosecuting crimes that are brought to you by the police?
Yes. I mean, that's what we do most of. But there's more to it than that. We can do a lot more in being more proactive in terms of crime prevention. You know, what we do at the moment is so reactive. We wait for a crime to happen, then somebody calls the police, then the police make an arrest, and then they bring it to the DA or the city attorney and we start prosecuting. Wouldn't it be better if we could stop that call up front? In fact, that crime never happened because we took strong, proactive measures to stop the criminal from having the opportunity to commit the crime. And that's what I was recognized for my work when I was in Lancaster, the city of Lancaster, in bringing in novel, innovative crime-fighting programs.
Now, I understand that you actually have been recognized by the United States Congress. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. You're giving me the perfect opportunity to blow my own trumpet. Here's a certificate of U.S. congressional recognition for being Crime Buster of the Year.
Crime Buster of the Year, it says, Certificate of Special Congressional Recognition presented to Deputy DA David Berger. Crime Buster of the Year Award in recognition of outstanding and invaluable service to the community. Hope you don't mind my reading that out.
I don't mind. I hope my head hasn't expanded so that it doesn't fill the screen. And of course, on the same topic, I got a host of other awards from the county and from the city and from the California Congress as well, recognizing what I did because we started taking real steps to stop crime from happening at all. And that's something we can do. We need to be much smarter in the way that we fight crime.
Now, we have an election coming up in March of next year, 2009, March 2009, and that is the election in which you're running for city attorney.
That's correct.
What do you hope to bring to the city attorney's office?
Well, obviously, 12 years experience with the DA's office in prosecuting crime. I've had, for the last 8 of those years, a magnificent example of a boss in Steve Cooley, who has done some tremendous things to improve the esprit de corps, the spirit of the deputy DAs that work for him. And I think that's something the city attorney's office badly needs. They've had to work with Rocky Delgadillo, who I won't bore you with all the stories about him, but he really wasn't the shining example. It's not very satisfying to go to work for somebody that you actually might one day be prosecuting. So I think it's incumbent on me to change that spirit in the office and do some things that Steve Cooley did, such as providing the deputy city attorneys with better training so that they can do their job more efficiently.
So that's what I wanted to ask you. What is it that a good boss does, which is what you want to be,
right,
compared with what a bad boss does, and what effect does it have on society?
Well, I think the most important thing you need to do is to listen to your troops. You need to listen to what they're telling you and figure out whether it's just a minor gripe and complaint that everyone has about any job, or if there's something that's really lacking. I find it puzzling that some of the cases that the city attorney has to deal with are just things that could be dealt with in other ways. We don't need to go to trial over a person driving on a suspended license. There ought to be a better way to use our resources. It costs nearly $10,000 a day to run a courtroom. And, what is the sense of having a trial that lasts 11 days over a person driving on a suspended license?
So someone drives on a suspended license, what happens if they're found guilty?
Well, not very much. That theoretically they could be sent to jail. Most likely they'll get a fine and be told to go and get their license. Now, there's got to be a way of achieving that end without wasting court resources for people who are willing to do what we need them to do, which is get a license and get insurance and drive safely on the roads.
So you have the notion that it's better to make sure they get a license than to send them to jail?
Basically, yes, because I need jail to be for the worst of the worst. The worst of the worst at the moment are the gang members that are seriously taking over our city. They're outnumbering our police by 8 to 1. We have about 80,000 gang members in the city of Los Angeles, and we have 10,000 cops to deal with them. So
we'll go back to that, but 10,000 policemen. So if we have 10,000 policemen, how does that relate to other cities?
Well, let's take, you mentioned New York at the beginning of the show. New York is a city of some 8 million people, and they have 33,000 police officers. Los Angeles is a city of 4 million people, and we have 10,000 police officers. Almost half the number of police officers in LA compared to New York. Furthermore, New York is far more compact, a much more confined area than Los Angeles. Los Angeles is a sprawling area, and if anybody who lives on the west side knows, you very rarely see a police car in that area. Because we're so diverse, so spacious, if you like. There aren't enough police officers to adequately police all the areas of the city. So we're at a disadvantage, and the gang members are taking advantage of that.
And you feel that if you're elected to the city attorney's office, that you will be able to effect some improvements?
Yes, I can't do what would be necessary to give us the equivalent number of police officers to New York. I don't think anyone can do that. We'd need another 6,500 cops, and at the moment, the city can't find the money for another 1,000. So what we have to do is be much more intelligent and incisive in the way we use what we have. We need to target the areas that are badly affected and put an end to the gangs running parts of the city.
So you've mentioned gangs quite a bit. So right now you're talking in terms of really a more intelligent use of resources. And do you think you have the experience and the wherewithal to bring that about?
Well, yes, because I'll do exactly for Los Angeles what I did for Lancaster. I will use other resources in addition to our 10,000 LAPD officers.
So I understand you were sent out to Lancaster on a special assignment.
I actually volunteered for the job. Yeah. It was a 72-mile commute each direction, but that was in the days when gas was $1.49 a gallon, so it wasn't quite so bad. I'm not sure I'd be quite so willing to volunteer today, but I had such a great time up there because I got to work with the citizens of the city, excuse me, the ones that actually cared about improving things. I got to work with the city council. I got to work with the city attorney. I worked in the sheriff's station. I was in a black and white most days, out on the streets, and helping make the place safer. And that's what I want to do in LA, because when you have what we all know, the bad areas of town, there's always going to be that one apartment building or that one house where the gang members are all gathering. Now, you can't arrest them for just doing that. You have to use other means to tackle that problem. One of the means you might use, for example, is to go to the housing authority and see whether that particular house is being paid for by government funds. Because if it is, there are serious restrictions on who can be there and what conduct can occur there. And you don't need a search warrant to go in there and look for example, firearms or narcotics, both of which will get that house shut down faster than a criminal prosecution will. And that's what I call an intelligent use of resources. Bring the housing authority in, bring parole department in, bring the probation department in, use those resources together with our existing resources, and we'll achieve some results.
So you were involved, I understand, in the Mongols motorcycle gang case?
Yes.
What was that all about?
This was a really interesting case because we've all heard of the so-called Ponzi scheme. In fact, obviously in the news at the moment is this chap Madoff in New York, who's stolen money from I believe it's about $50 billion they're talking about.
That's what they're talking about.
A Ponzi scheme is where I say to you, give me some money, $1,000, and I'll give you $1,500 back in a week. And you say, well, that's a good investment, I'll do that. So I get your $1,000, and I get another $1,000 from a friend of yours because you said this chap's got a good scheme going. And now I've got $2,000 from you two people. I go back to the fellow I saw last week who I said I'd give him $1,500 back, and I say, look, here's your $1,500. Do you want to increase it and make more out of it?
So in general, a Ponzi scheme is where you have to funnel people in at the bottom in order to pay the people going out at the top.
Right.
You're taking your cut on the way all the way.
Right.
And eventually the whole scheme collapsed because it's just supported by nothing.
Which is what it did with Madoff, because people went to the police and said, look, I've been robbed. But in my case, it was rather different, because the Ponzi there was a Mongols motorcycle gang member.
Yeah, I didn't know they were into Ponzi. I thought they were into beating you to death with an iron bar.
Well, the gangs are getting cleverer, and they're moving into other forms of crime. And what this chap was doing was basically, when people came to him and said, where's my money? And instead of palming them off with stories, he had two of his guys sort of standing there in their leather jackets, with a chain or a knife or a gun. And he'd say, are you sure you want to ask that question? We'll get in touch with you. So he was intimidating them into basically not reporting the crime. And it was a very difficult case to crack because people didn't want to talk to us. So it was my job to get them to talk to us. And, I think I was quite successful in that. This chap went to jail for 12 years.
Oh, very good. But now everyone's probably noticed by this time that you talk rather similar to me. How does this come about?
Yes, I was born in England, but my mother's family were from California. They lived in Beverly Hills, in fact. So I had been visiting California, Beverly Hills, since I was a child, every summer. And, you probably remember what England was like way back. It wasn't as it didn't have the climate that Los Angeles had. It didn't have the television, which for a kid was so fascinating. 13 channels. We had 2, and they stopped at 10 o'clock at night. So this was the place for me. I loved it here, and I always wanted to come here.
And you're an American citizen now.
Oh yes.
Yeah. So you're going. So that obviously that means you can run for office.
Yes.
But not for presidency.
No, I think I'll keep out of the presidency.
So you got it up in Lancaster. I think, you gained a great deal of experience in the actual hands-on work with limited resources of fighting gangs. Why is it so? Is that right?
That's a fair statement, and I think it's also fair to say that I also learnt a lot about dealing with local government, which is why I think I'll fit in well with the city of LA.
So did you, when you got up there in the beginning when you got up to Lancaster, but don't forget you're going to tell us about the King Fred gang case.
Yes.
When you got up to Lancaster, did you find that there was not that kind of close liaison on cooperation that you were later able to build?
No, in fact, there were various groups that absolutely, almost positively, didn't want to work together. They had their own little domains, and they wanted to keep them sort of sacrosanct. So it was important to bridge those gaps and to find ways to get people to cooperate together. Different law enforcement agencies can be very protective about their area. I mean, I was one of the first people to have a combined task force of deputy sheriffs and Los Angeles Police Department. Now, usually there's a sort of friendly rivalry between the LAPD and the Sheriff's Department, but we had them together on a series of raids, and they worked so well together. It was determined that continue to do things like that, and that's what I want to bring the other way now. I want to bring the sheriffs into the city, if they'll let me.
Was there a serious gang problem up there in Lancaster?
Yes, it was one that was getting worse because people were leaving the city of Los Angeles and looking at the cheap and affordable housing up in Palmdale and Lancaster.
Well, what would you like to tell us about the King Fred gang case?
Yes,
the Thony lawyer case.
Well, let's talk about King Fred because it was an interesting case. This is when I was in Los Angeles, and it was a guy who was basically starting up his own gang. He had a group of people, and I'm actually not going to tell you the name of the gang, because one of the things these gang members love is to hear their gang name, or to hear the name of their gang or their own personal moniker. Now we've let it out of the bag that it's King Fred, yeah. But we'll keep it at that. This chap, though, late one night had been busy spraying graffiti over a shop front. And a motorist stationing at the lights had challenged him and ended up with a gun pointed in his face. And at that point, by sheer luck, two LAPD motor officers on motorcycles came up, and our gang member tossed the gun and ran off, but the good old boys in blue, to protect and serve, they caught him. My difficulty was the guy in the car, who was the victim, had left the country. So I didn't have a witness. I had some testimony I could use, and it was a very dry case. So I had decided to do something different, and that was to use PowerPoint to sort of animate the whole crime, the way things happened, to let the jury see it for what it was. And remarkably, in a case where you don't have a victim and you're relying on people just reading things out, I got a verdict in 2.5 hours, a guilty verdict. And King Fred went to prison for 8.5 years. And afterwards, the jury all told me how impressed they were with the presentation, because it made everything so clear to them. And this is what I want to do for the City Attorney's Office. The trials that we are going to have to conduct, I want them to be using modern multimedia presentations, because the juries like them, the juries expect them, and we need to know how to do it. And the DA's office recognized what I did in that case, and actually have had me doing training for other DAs to show them how to do that.
So you're already doing a fantastic job as a deputy district attorney. What is it about the city attorney's job that you think you can bring us some benefit to?
I like the idea of having the ability to actually direct the office in the way that I think is going to be the best for the city. That is, to make us smarter and better at what we do and more effective. As a DA, I'm part of a structure. I have to follow what the leader says. And I like my leader, don't get me wrong, but I'd like to lead the city attorney's office. We are the second biggest city in the country. We are actually the city that most other countries look to for what's going on. LA is what it's really all about, and we should have the best city attorney's office in the country, the most effective at fighting crime, and one that sets an example to other cities in the US and indeed the world as to how we can make our city safer and more efficient.
And you're going to be up against some opposition. What are you going to bring to that office that you feel they can't?
I'm a prosecutor. I'm not really a politician. I'm here to do that job. I'm not taking that job for what it will do for me. The past 3 city attorneys have all really used the office as a stepping stone to go on to bigger and better things. I'm actually interested in doing it because Los Angeles is where I live and where I hope to continue to live. And I hope I can leave a legacy that makes the city safer for everyone, not just more attractive for special interests, and make it something that I can be proud of, that I can look back on one day, say, we actually did something here, and maybe I'll pick up another one of those nice awards.
So you think that you want the city attorney's office to stop being a mere political stepping stone and become a job, and that you feel that you can do.
Yes, a serious crime-fighting job, which is what I do.
Right. And you don't think that the candidates, well, your main candidate is quite going to fulfill that bill?
Well, he's never had any experience in law enforcement. You're talking about Jack Weiss, who's a council member. Here's a man who last week said he thought it was a good idea to reduce police services on the west side of LA because we're opening 2 new police stations and we don't have enough staff for those. So we'll take cops away from the west side and send them to these new police stations. Now that's not a good idea. We are in the midst of a recession. Crime is going to rise. The attractive properties are on the west side of LA. Where do you think the burglars, where do you think the criminals are going to go for rich pickings? It's going to be the west side. And yet there's Jack Weiss saying, take the cops away. That's hardly the attitude for the city attorney. And frankly, it shows that he doesn't have any law enforcement experience whatsoever.
Lacks that. Now you have a slogan, campaign slogan, judge me by my enemies.
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that. Here it is. I put it up there for a number of reasons. One of which was, well, all the professional politicians have already got their endorsements from all sorts of useless people. I don't need endorsements, because what this is really about is not who likes me, but who doesn't like me. And the people that don't like me are the gang members, the criminals. They don't like me because they know I go after them. And I go after them relentlessly with everything I possibly can. So that's who you should be looking at to see whether I'm good for this job. See who doesn't like me, not glad-handing developers who are willing to slap millions of dollars into my slush fund. No, it's the gang members who don't want me.
Right. So we've got 5 minutes to go. Then we're looking at, let's see, what do you do to keep gang people off the street? The gangs have to be fought with every possible means available. You can use injunctions, for example. Not a lot of people know this, but the city attorney is singularly responsible for obtaining injunctions. Those are laws that say 2 or more gang members may not congregate in a certain area and threaten the community. That's a very valuable tool in fighting crime. You can also use their parole or probation officers to restrict their conduct further. And eventually what you can do is make life so miserable for the gang members that hopefully they'll just leave. I can't say we'll get them to reform, although there is a movement and there is funding available for helping people to leave the gangster lifestyle. And I'm all in favor of that if it works. But frankly, I haven't seen much evidence of it yet. In fact, last year, the city gave over $1.6 million to somebody who was supposedly a former gang member, who was now using that money to help at-risk kids get out of gangs. And what he ended up doing was being convicted last year of dealing with semi-automatic weapons and machine guns. He hadn't given up the gangster lifestyle at all. He was laughing at the city, and the city, unfortunately, were naive enough to believe in him. I'm not that person. I won't buy that. I won't believe it. Some people might say that restricting the freedom to get together of gang members is a constitutional violation. Do you think that's right? How do you respond to that?
Well, the civil liberties have always had some control on them. I mean, you can't have unrestricted rights. I mean, we have restrictions on free speech, just as we have restrictions on freedom of association. And I think where people are gathering for a singular purpose, namely the commission of crime and intimidation, that's not one of those protected crimes, one of those protected rights. Nobody ever, I think, would have thought that when we were talking about freedom of association, we were going to say, we'll allow the gangs to conduct their lethal business.
So you must have had quite a bit of contact with people who live in the areas where gang members are most likely to be found. What kind of feedback do you get from those ordinary residents?
One of the most satisfying aspects of the job I did when I was in Lancaster was after we had done a series of raids targeting a particular gang. We basically cleaned up a neighborhood where this gang had controlled it, and we ended up taking a bunch of people to jail. And after the last of the large trucks that carted them off to jail had left, people started very slowly coming out from behind their doors and sort of looking around and seeing if it was safe. And then they started talking to us, and I remember one woman, she wrote me a most moving letter. She'd said how we'd transformed her life because we'd got rid of this blight. And this poor old lady had been subject to being victimized by these gang members who would shake her down for money, commit unspeakable acts in front of her just to terrify her, and thought they had the run of the place. Well, we changed that, we turned that around. And that's what this job is about. It's about making life better for decent people.
So it's been a pleasure. Actually, we've got about another 50 seconds. So the floor is yours.
Well,
I want to be the city attorney.
I want to be the city attorney, and I really want people to go to my website. It's berger4ca.com and find out a bit more about me. Find out a little bit more about what I can do, because I think if people realize that they can make a change in this city, they'll join me. Just as I was motivated when Barack Obama started his presidency, his campaign. He gave me the feeling that I could be part of a change, and I want people in Los Angeles to feel the same way.
So here we are, we're wrapping up the show. So thank you so much for coming on the show. It's a very fascinating job that you have been doing for the last 12 years. And I'm sure that many people who watch this show will be interested in seeing you get elected, or at least they will have the opportunity to look at the ballot very carefully next March and make an informed decision. Thank you so much for coming on the show, David Berger.
And thank you so much, Charles, and thank you for listening to me.
So we're kind of, are we off the air? Are we?